So this is called Introduction to Long-Term Care, and it's, as you know, my name is Linda Olson. So these are the objectives for our webinar tonight. It's to introduce long-term care in the context of Canadian culture. And one of the reasons we're doing long-term care is I have found, just talking to my coworkers who are IENs, that they don't have a lot of information about long-term care before they come to Canada. Most of the IENs I've met in my work have very clinical, technical backgrounds. And another thing, we want to learn the definition of the frail elderly and the profile of morbidity. In long-term care, they're not all elderly, but the majority of people in long-term care are elderly. And they're not just older people, they're frail people. So we'll talk more about that. They're frail and they're old. And then the third objective is understanding the patient role in advanced care planning. Now we'll talk about that a little bit later, but that comes into play with patient-centered care. And then we're going, at the last half of the scenario, we're going to discuss a specific, last half of the webinar, we're going to discuss a specific scenario and look at the role of the nurse. So we can, next one. So what is long-term care? Can anybody type in their ideas of what long-term care is? Some of you might know, some of you might just want to guess. So if you want to put that in.
Yeah.
What is long-term care? So who would like to? Yeah, it's a little slow. Clients who need 24-hour support. That's true. Long-term care is they can't look after themselves. They have to be somebody looking after them 24/7. Who else has got who can add to that? Where people get treatment for long-term. Yes, maybe, although you can get treatment in your own home for a long period of time. So it's coupled with the 24-hour support and the long-term treatment. It might be the treatment might be just helping with activities of daily living. People who can no longer do that for themselves. Always people who need support in doing ADL. Yes, for sure.
How do you move over into the
okay. Okay. So yes, they need support with, it's called personal care, which is ADLs and all those basic things that they're just no longer able to do. What else have we got here? Residents in which their families are not able to take care of them and their needs have to be met. And that's true. In Canada, you'll find that the families are smaller, maybe than some of you are used to. Also, they're more dispersed. I know in Canada at one time, the families looked after people when they were old and infirmed. But now it's no longer practical for most people. A family might have, an elderly person might have had only 2 children, and one may live in Vancouver and one may live in Halifax. So they're not physically there to look after them. And there still has to be somewhere for these people to be looked after. Another one is for people with chronic illness or disabilities and geriatrics. Okay, they don't necessarily, well, they have chronic illness. If they're no longer able to look after themselves, it could be arthritis, they can't put on their clothes, they might have dementia, and mostly it's geriatrics, but not entirely. Patients with chronic debilitating illness. Yes, I would say so, and that illness might, it's debilitating. We'll look at that, some more of those debilitating illnesses. Anyone else? Services which help meet both the medical and non-medical needs of the people with disabilities who cannot care for themselves for long periods of time. That's correct. Long-term care is not just the physical looking after somebody. It's the social, it's the recreational, and the spiritual. So they'll bring church services, religious services into the long-term care facility. They'll bring in recreation. They're not just housed and looked after on their physical needs. And help me needs of people with chronic illness and disability. Yes, that's true. And that's again, people. You put, Harinder, you put people with chronic illnesses. You didn't say geriatrics. And it covers the whole spectrum, but it's mostly geriatrics. So I think it seems like you've got a pretty good idea of what long-term care is, the definition of long-term care. So we can just move on. And here, this is my slide of long-term care, what it is. Yeah, this is, okay. So this is the definition that I have is long-term care is ongoing, indefinite institutional care for individuals who can no longer fully care for themselves. And I think that word fully care for themselves is important. They might be able to do some things, and they might not be able to do everything. And one of the things we're looking at in long-term care is helping people do as much for themselves as they can, even though it might not be very much. And another thing is the atmosphere is more home-like whenever possible. So we're trying to make it less like a hospital and more like a home. So these are the people who fit into the long-term care family, we'll call it, or a long-term care group. So it's the patient or the resident. We often call them resident if it's long-term care because they live there. And their role, the role of the resident is they're the decision makers. They are the ones who make the decisions for themselves to the best of their ability. That is part of patient-centered care, which is part of your standards of practice. Now, you might find in patient-centered care or long-term care that some of the people can't make decisions for themselves because of dementia or something like that. Then they have to have a substitute decision maker. And the decisions are written in the goals of care. When someone comes into long-term care, they have a written document of what they want done and what they don't want done. So the nurse's role in long-term care is the coordinator of care. That's their basic role. They're coordinating the care and helping, giving information to the client or to the client's designate or family to make sure we're doing what that client wants to do. There's lots of other roles that the nurse has. So the nurse gives treatments and medications and helps with personal care, but their main role is coordinator of care. Now the family is social support for the patient or the resident, and they may also be the decision makers if the resident or patient cannot make decisions for themselves. But in Canada, we consider the resident or the patient to be the person who makes the decisions, not family. And that might be somewhat different than some of your backgrounds. I'm not sure. I know some of you will have the background, but the families make the decisions together. But here in Canada, we consider the patient themselves to make the decision, and that's in our standards of practice for patient-centered care, and it's also in our laws governing healthcare. So the healthcare team, they're the doctors, the nurses, social services, healthcare aides, recreation, physio, occupational therapy. So where I work, we have music therapy, we have pet therapy, people coming in with pets. A lot of different people are working as a team to look after this patient and support this patient. And also, you'll notice here, healthcare aides. In long-term care, healthcare aides are pretty much the primary caregivers. They are the ones who do the actual hands-on care. And there's, if you work in long-term care, there'll be maybe one nurse and 5 healthcare aides work together. So you'll be working mostly with healthcare aides, and they are the frontline caregivers. They're your eyes, your ears. You're the one who's charted on these things. You're the one who's responsible, but they are really I'll consider your eyes and your ears. You can't be everywhere, but they're really, really a major part of the healthcare team in long-term care. Next. And then the next slide, I can keep talking more.
Yeah.
So, okay, so this is just looking at the Manitoba population. You'll see that there's this big bulge here at people between 45 and 65, although this is 2011, so this is already 5 years old. This big bulge in that is what we call the baby boomers. They were the people who were born after the Second World War, who were born after 1945. They're a big portion of the population, and they're now becoming old. So we really see that there's going to be a higher and higher proportion of elderly people as in the general population, and they are the ones, the main people who are in long-term care. So long-term care is going to be a bigger and bigger part of nursing, and also it's also often where new nurses and internationally trained nurses get their start in the healthcare field, just because there's lots of jobs and it's easier to get in, and it's a very specialized area. And what we call the older people in long-term care, they're not just old, but they're called the frail elderly. And this is the definition of frail elderly: those with advanced age, that's the elderly part of it, coupled with disease, dependency, disability, and decline. So they're old and they're ill, and they've got reduced physiological reserves. They've got brain reserves, and they might have dementia, endocrine, diabetes, immune system. As people age, their immune system is deteriorating. Their muscles are no longer as strong as they were, cardiovascular, respiratory. So they've got a lot of body parts that are just wearing out. And that's what's making them frail as well as old. And they've got cumulative decline until a major stressor triggers a disproportionate negative result. So they might be, old people living at home, but something happens. They fall and they break their hip, for example. That's a very common thing. They end up in the hospital. They have maybe their hip repaired, but they've been in bed, so their muscles get weak very quickly. It's very hard to bring that back. They may never walk again. They might be in bed a lot. It compromises their respiratory system, which was, maybe because they're old, it was deteriorating, but this kind of tipped it over the edge to make them frail elderly rather than elderly. And it's the frail elderly that are in long-term care. It's not just the age, it's the age coupled with all these other things. And it's very important to remember that not all elderly people are frail elderly. You will see stories about people who are 90 years old and going skiing and doing all kinds of things. They're elderly, but they're not frail. You might see somebody who is only, say, 50 years old, but because of a lot of disease, things like diabetes, they become frail, and their body might be elderly because it's deteriorating, but not elderly in years. So we're looking at those kind of things. What is the profile of long-term care morbidity? What kind of things do you think you might see in morbidity in long-term care patients? Here's Ralph. Let's see. Okay, let's see how many people, okay, here usually end up at the end of life. Oh, I just want to mention this one. Miriam, from the last questions we put up, she put usually ends up to the end of life. Yeah, usually long-term care people, if they're elderly, are there till the end of their life. So I just wanted to, that was another good point there that we missed the last time. So what is the morbidity profile? What do you think some of the things that you'd see among residents in a long-term care facility. What kind of diseases and what kind of conditions. Let's see what we've got here. Some of these will be very apparent, some of them might not. Heart disease, absolutely. Lots of heart disease. They've got plaque building up in their veins for a long period of time. Diabetes, yes, because your endocrine system is wearing out. Arthritis, absolutely. Osteoarthritis, after you've been walking around on those knees and those legs for 85 years, they start wearing out. Osteoporosis, we know that bones will deteriorate with age. Pneumonia, they're not moving around as much. They're not, taking as deep breaths. They'll get pneumonia. Hypertension, again, with cardiovascular disease. Dementia, Alzheimer's, yes. And two people are mentioning that. And that seems to be increasing in proportion, and also increasing because of the age. The older you are, the more likely you'll get dementia. And also it seems to be increasing for other reasons. Parkinson's disease, that's another disease that will be increasing with age. All kinds of infections because their immune system is not as good. Alzheimer's, again, very good. Old age, again, old age isn't the only thing that would bring somebody into long-term care. Paralysis, maybe, but it would have to be related to something else. MS. MS is a disease that hits younger people, but often they can cope with it for a long period of time until they get older, and then it'll bring them into long-term care. It might not right at the beginning. Anybody else? So you can see that mobility limitations with its complications. So say they've got arthritis. They can't move around as much. They maybe have a broken hip, so they're not moving around enough. All the complications that would go with decreased mobility, muscle wasting, all those things, impaired skin integrity related to diabetes and immobility. So one thing is compounding on the next thing. DVTs, venous ulcers, that is related to limitations in mobility. And organ failures. Organ failures would be their organs are wearing out. People don't live forever. Their joints wear out, their heart wears out, their lungs wear out. All these things wear out. What they die from depends on which wears out first. Cataracts, more common in older people, related to age. Anybody else? That's just a couple. So we've got a pretty good idea that things are wearing out, and they're very complicated. Hearing loss, more common in older people than younger people. These are very, very complicated medical conditions, because one thing compounds on another thing. Depression. If you can't hear and you've got cataracts and you can't move around and you can't do the things you did before, and you're living in a nursing home and you're not in your own home, depression is really, really common. So that compounds, maybe, for example, you're not eating properly, and then that compounds on cognitive problems. Well, that's with age, but also depression can compound that. So these are very complex compound problems where somebody younger, they break their leg, say, for example, fall and break their leg. Basically, their problem would be a broken leg. An older person, a broken leg, which compounds their mobility, which makes them depressed, which, they've got muscle wasting. Like it's because they're frail. One thing just compounds on the next. We can look at the next slide. And here I'll show you this is what Manitoba Health has this is year 2011, 2012. it says the profile of long-term care mobility. 61% of people in long-term care have dementia. And this is 2012, and I would guess that if we looked at 2016, that dementia will be higher. I've just noticed that in my own practice. Bladder incontinence, 67%. Now you see people with bladder incontinence, the first thing they do is they don't drink as much water because they don't want to have an accident. So they're getting dehydration, which affects their cognitive abilities. Bowel incontinence, depression, 18%. And I think that the depression is probably a little bit underrepresented in that 18%. Depression in general is underrepresented because people don't always talk about it. Daily pain, arthritis, diabetes, all kinds of things that happen. Limited or no social engagement. Once they are institutionalized, they don't have their community, they don't have their network of friends, so they are no social engagement, and that compounds on their diet, on their pain. People who are who are alone will tend to have more pain than people who have some diversion. Chronic diseases, diabetes 21%, musculoskeletal 51%, which is understandable because joints and muscles are wearing out. COPD 13%, CHA 15%, and cancer 6%. And also you'll know that cancer is much more prevalent in older people because their whole body is deteriorating. There's a lot of theories on what causes cancer, but cancer will be more prominent in people who are frail. It'll be, they won't be able to deal with it. Their body won't be able to deal with it as well. We can look at the next. Great. Okay. Now, before we go into the scenarios, I want to talk a little bit of what we call advanced care planning, and because it'll come into the scenario. But advanced care planning, does anybody know? Maybe if you work in a hospital, you might know about this. But this is the definition of it. It's a treatment option agreed upon by the patient, the resident, the client, or the substitute decision maker in the healthcare team. So when someone comes into long-term care, they have an agreement with the facility on what they want done. What they want done. Do they want just if they get sick, if they get pneumonia or whatever happens, if they want nothing done, they just want to be kept comfortable and just allowed to die? Do they want investigations? Do they want resuscitation? And this is a document that is introduced right when someone is admitted. And it is the role of the nurse to introduce that document, to talk to the people about the document, explain what it is, explain why we have to have it, and we want it as soon as possible. Because somebody could come into long-term care and they could have a cardiac arrest. We want to know if they want to be resuscitated or not. That's an example. And that's important to know because that could happen theoretically in the first 5 minutes you get in the door. So this is a document that's gone over with the patient or with their substitute decision makers. So if they have dementia or something, they have somebody who's making a decision for them. So it's really important. It's an important piece of an important document. It's a legal document. It is the job of the nurse to present this, to explain it to them, and keep giving the education, make sure the people understand. So that's informed consent of what they're doing. And another thing is to tell people that this is not written in stone. I don't know if you know that expression, written in stone. Once this is signed, it can be changed at any time. If they decide to change their mind tomorrow, they come back, they say, I want this changed tomorrow, and it's redone. If they want it changed a year from now, they can have it redone. Typically, what we do is this is reassessed a minimum of every year, once a year. But it can be reassessed at any time by the patient themselves or their substitute decision maker. It gets reviewed every year at a minimum. So it not often gets reviewed. It is.
Oh, it is.
It is. It's reviewed every year at a minimum. So we can just look at this. It says there's three options. One is comfort care. So that's symptom control and maintenance, making somebody as comfortable as possible, but not trying to keep them alive longer. And comfort care can mean a lot of things. It doesn't mean you don't treat them. Doesn't mean you just give them painkillers, analgesic. I worked in palliative care. We were doing things like blood transfusions because people were weak, they were short of breath, and blood transfusions made them feel better. That was considered comfort care. It wasn't prolonging their life, it was just making them more comfortable. Antibiotics for reversible diseases, we're calling conditions. A reversible condition would be something like pneumonia. A reversible, something like diabetes would not be a reversible condition. So say somebody had pneumonia, they were choking, antibiotics. That would be considered comfort care, not trying to extend their life, just trying to make them more comfortable. Medical care is any appropriate investigation or intervention excluding resuscitation. So any appropriate investigation or intervention, an appropriate intervention could be repairing a hip fracture. Or it could be, it can be anything. It can be a heart transplant. It can, as big as detailed as a heart transplant. Any kind of anything that would be appropriate to help this person live a better life and extend their life. So medical care could also be for quality of life and extension of life, but it does not include resuscitation. And then we have resuscitation, which is any appropriate investigation, intervention, and including resuscitation. So that's those are the three things. This is what Winnipeg Regional Health Authority, this is their goals of care, and you can just look at the form that you would be looking at.
Oh yeah, sure.
Mm-hmm. Okay, I just want to show you the actual form. I guess we should put that on.
Okay, let me just. I just have to share the screen.
Okay, I just want to let you have a look at the form here. This is from the Winnipeg Regional Health Authority. In the top right-hand corner, you would put your addressograph or whatever you have. And it's called Advanced Care Planning. Goals of care. So here they have the goals of care, and it says comfort care, medical care, resuscitation. You would be explaining these things to the patient or their proxy, whoever is speaking for them if they can't speak for themselves. That's your job, to do education on these things. And you answer all their questions. And if you can't answer a question, you find someone who can answer the question. They have to have informed consent for these things. For a patient or a family member, or they have to actually know what they're agreeing to. And also it says, if required care is not available in current location or setting, does the patient want to be transferred to an alternate facility? Now I'm going back to the scenario of somebody falls and breaks their hip, because that's very, very common. Somebody could fall on a bed when they're in a personal care home. It happens a lot, restless, climbing out of bed, confused, and they have a broken hip. Now, what you're saying is you want them transferred to another facility, because in long-term care, they do not do surgery. They don't do any kind of really clinical treatment. So they're saying, do you want this person transferred? Even if they're comfort care, would you still like them transferred to hospital if they needed, say, surgery or an IV antibiotic? And they have to agree to that. Sometimes residents or family members will say, I don't want them transferred to a hospital, mostly because they're there, they're sitting in emergency for a long time, they might be confused, they want treatment, but they only want it if it can be in the personal care setting, because they don't want to move that person. That's an option that they have. So we can just lift it up a little bit. So now it says indicate the individual. Okay, indicate all individuals who participate in the goal of care decision. Okay, so it's the patient and the client, and it could be family members. That says individuals who are participating in the discussion. But it is the responsibility of the patient to have the final decision. So they might have family members and the patient. You might have both of these people, both of those top two boxes, but it is the patient who makes the final decision. It might be a substitute decision maker, because the patient is not competent. Or a patient may be competent and decide they don't want to make these decisions. They just don't want to. And I've seen that quite a bit with older residents. They don't want to know. They don't want to make those decisions. They were grew up in a culture where you don't talk about these things. So they would rather have their son or their daughter or their granddaughter make the decision, and they don't want to be involved. And that's their conscious decision. Even if they're competent, they may want to have a substitute decision maker. And it said healthcare providers. That would be the people who are involved. Now it says you can also add extra things in here. You can add details. Some people will write in there, I don't want any kind of tube feeding if I can't eat for myself. For me, if I was filling this out, me personally, I would pick R. I want resuscitation. I want everything. But I would write in here, I don't want any long-term ventilation. And that's my own personal thing, because I just don't think I could survive. I want to live if I have to depend on a machine to breathe. So that would be something I would write in. I just couldn't. I just don't think I could do that. So I said, I would say, I want everything. I want resuscitation, but not to the point of that. Some people will say, and a lot of people will say, that they'll have medical care, resuscitation, except if they have Alzheimer's. And Alzheimer's is a dementia that people are very, very afraid of. It's one of the number one things that people fear getting older, and they'll put that in because they don't want to live if they have that. So it depends on they can add whatever they want. Whatever they want. Oh, okay. So, okay, that's we'll won't go any farther than that. We better get to the scenarios. I don't want to get any farther than that. Okay. Maybe any quick questions about advanced care planning? Yeah, quick questions about advanced care planning. I think that's. Okay. Anybody have any questions, or that might come up during the scenario? Oh, we might have questions as the scenario goes on, but I want to read the scenario. We can go back to it. I want to read this scenario to you, and then we're going to have We'd like ideally 3 volunteers, but we have one that's Harinder.
Yeah. Harinder, yeah.
Harinder, for sure, and maybe 2 more feel like they want to jump in. But here's the scenario. Mr. W has recently entered a long-term care facility. He broke his hip 2 months ago and since then has not been able to carry out his activities of daily living without extensive assistance. So then he's now frail. He's in personal care. He states that he has always been a strong person and proud of being independent. And he says, this is no life for me. He has chosen comfort care as his care planning goal. The staff and Mr. W's family feel that he has settled in well to the ward. He takes part in all ward activities and is a favorite among the residents. He's even planning on playing Santa Claus for the next Christmas party. So he's quite making a life for himself. He goes out with his family on a regular basis. Today, Mr. W is lethargic, has a low-grade fever and shortness of breath. The doctor has diagnosed him with pneumonia. The family has requested medication for his pneumonia, that would be comfort care, and the doctor is aware of Mr. W's ACP of comfort care and ordered an antibiotic as a comfort measure to alleviate his symptoms. And Mr. W is refusing the antibiotic. Now, what would you do? You're the nurse. How would you handle this scenario?
Okay, so we're going to turn on Harinder's microphone.
Where's Harinder right here?
Do you see her? Right here. Oh, great.
Okay, Harinder, we're going to turn on your microphone if you want to start, and then make maybe a couple people.
Harinder?
Hello. Hi.
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 Okay. You're the nurse.
Okay.
I think you would do. Maybe put up the
That won't be.
oh,
Okay, so let's try again.
okay. So there you are. Okay. So there's the screen. That's just the summary of what's happened. So you can just keep track of it. What would you do in this case, and why would you do it? If you were the nurse. He's refusing the antibiotic.
First of all, I would like to start discussion with him, like just with an open-ended question, like what he feels about the long-term care and what is his opinion why he don't want antibiotics. And after getting his point of view, like I would like to explain his way that why antibiotics are important, what is pneumonia, and what can happen to him if he will not take the antibiotics. And I will just leave the decision on him, but I will try to explain him like why it's so important for him. Yeah. And also I would like to involve like his family members, yeah, and have a family meeting so that like family can understand, or he would like to discuss with his family like why they want it. Yeah, that's it.
Great. That sounds great. So,
Do I get someone else's?
yeah, have we got anybody else who wants to jump in and add to that? We'd like to just or type in something. Oh, here.
There's a couple of questions from before.
Okay. Are these okay? Let's just we've got a few.
Oh,
are these?
Hasna wants to go.
Okay, Hasna wants to go. How about Hasna?
Okay. Thank you, Harinder. I'm just going to mute you.
Okay.
Okay. Hasna, do you see her?
Where is Hasna? Here, right here. Okay, Hasna, what would you like to add to this? Oh, she's
Hasna. Oh.
Okay.
There we go.
Okay, we've got it. What would you like to add to this?
Asa, do you want to let us know what you would like to do in this scenario?
You can talk. We've unmuted your microphone.
Okay, we might be having difficulties
Yeah.
connecting. Okay.
Okay, we can come back to you, Hasna. We're having problems hearing you. Anybody else who would like to jump in and add something to this?
Yes, can you hear?
No. No, we can't hear you, Hasna. Okay, let's do that. No. We can come back to you, Hasna, and then is anybody else want to jump in and add?
Oh, Miriam.
Miriam, okay. Miriam, how about?
Miriam, there.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay, Miriam, what would you like to add?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, first of all, after, I would like to add, after those explanation and those things that before mentioned, I definitely respect my patient, and as I know that this patient is in comfort care, and my patient just refuses antibiotic. This is his request, and if after explanation he doesn't want to take any antibiotics, and he is in comfort care zone, then this is his request. I have to respect him. This is what I know about advanced care plan.
And it's part of patient-centered care.
Yeah.
I understand its practice. And like Herlinder said before, we want to make sure that he is informed.
Yeah, that's right. After all those explanation and information, all data that we can provide, I provide for my patient, and I inform that what will happen if you don't get this antibiotic. Then if my patient still refuses, then I accept and I respect my patient because he is in comfort care.
He's in charge, right? Because he's competent.
Yeah.
Now, what would you do with the family?
The family, first of all, the family, I know that it is hard for the family and it is a little bit challenging to talk with family, but the family also, now I can try to make a therapeutic communication with the family, have a empathetic communication with the family, and try to just persuade them to respect their patient request, because we know that everyone has a willing, and we have to respect their value and preferences.
And also in personal care, long-term care, often we call the family and all the people surrounding that person is actually almost like your patient.
Yeah.
So you're giving them, you have to give them the information. You have to tell them, but they also have to know that by law, this person.
Yeah, that's right. because first is, as I know, the first one is a patient, and then after that, the second one probably is a wife or husband, and then parents or kids, and then praxis, and
Well, it's the second person is whoever the patient says it is.
yeah, that's right. That's right. Yeah, that's right.
Does that differ from some of your practices before that in your practices in your home country? Does that differ?
In my country, is I would say is the same. We don't have actually the same form like advanced care plan, but we have a form for a consent. We get a consent from patients, because in our country, our practice is patient-centered care, and we do patient-centered care, and it's almost the same as here.
What country is that?
Pardon?
What country is that?
Iran.
Iran. Okay. How about, let me hear from some of other cultures and see if who makes the decision? Who makes the decisions culturally, and who makes the decisions by law? And is that different? Like some countries, I know, even in Canada.
Yeah, you're right. You're right. You're right.
You know, in my mother's time, say, it wasn't necessarily the patient; it had to be the whole family that.
Yeah, even in my country, in the south of my country, some Arabs live in the south of my country, and mostly the father of or grandfather even make decision for all of the family.
So, in Canada, your patients in long-term care will also be from diverse cultures.
Mm-hmm.
So they might be coming in with that kind of information. Maybe this person, we ask this patient to make a decision, and she feels that it's her husband who needs to make the decision. It's education of what our laws are and what patient-centered care is also. Mm-hmm. You're going to be coming from a different country and a different culture, but you're also going to be coming into a country that has diverse cultures. And it's really important to address those, because you want to make sure people's are respected, the patient's family. But underlying all this, we have patient-centered care, which is the patient, and we have laws that specifically say who has the last word. So that it's really, really complicated. It's complicated for everybody working in the healthcare field in Canada, because it's very diverse and becoming more diverse all the time. And you coming in have just another layer of complication.
Yeah, because we didn't actually, we don't have these levels of care. For instance, we don't have comfort care. Mm-hmm. We always do resuscitation. And
that was something that was done here in Canada. Before they brought in the idea of patient-centered care, that was the way it was done here too. Maybe we could just turn it over to people if they want to type in some things about what their background is or what they've seen in theirs involving.
We'll just mute
we're just going to mute you for Miriam, and then we're going to throw it open to.
We have 7 minutes left.
Oh, we only have 7 minutes left. Yeah. Okay. So everybody want to just add something, because now supposing you come from a culture that, for example, that you said the father or the grandfather make the decisions. You come from that culture, but you are now coming into a culture with the laws, the standards of practice for nurses and the laws say that we can't do that. So you have to be aware of that, and that's part of your teaching. And yeah, it's complicated. It's going to be, it's a difficult situation, but it's a situation that has to be done. It's part of our standards of practice, and it's part of our documentation. So anybody? Oh, any questions? Maybe we'll just throw it open to some questions.
Or do you want to take up what you would do in this case?
Okay. I know what I can do is I'll tell you what I would do in this case, and it was pretty much the same as what Harinder would do. You're talking to the person. You're making sure that they understand why they're getting antibiotics. It's going to make them feel more comfortable because they're going to be choking. That's not comfortable. So you want to make sure they're informed of their, they have all the information necessary for their decision, which was mentioned here. I'm just summarizing. Okay, so you give them all the information you can. You're not trying to persuade them. That's their decision. You just want to make sure that they've got an informed decision. Then you want to also make sure that the family has an informed decision. And informing the family is, this is patient-centered care. This person, Mr. W, has the last word. Some families get very pushy. Some families get really angry at healthcare staff. Why aren't you giving them the antibiotic? It doesn't matter what they say. Don't they, we know better. You have to also inform the family about patient-centered care. And so you've got kind of you've got a lot of education to do. You've got a lot of education on signs and symptoms and the trajectory of what's going to happen to the patient. You've got a lot of things to talk to the family about, including the law, including the standards of practice. And then you have to go with patient-centered care, which says that the patient has the last word. You also have to make sure that the patient knows that they can change their mind at any time. In this particular scenario with the medications, if they wait too long, these antibiotics aren't going to be working fast enough. You have to also tell them that. But also leave the door open, or just what we say leave the door open. Make sure they know that these decisions that they can make can be changed at any time. They just have to inform us. The doctor in this scenario, the doctor is prescribing antibiotics. The doctor is usually not at the bedside. The doctor is not doing explaining here. If the person refuses, they refuse. You just say they refuse this treatment. The doctor, they don't want to push their antibiotics. They're basically in long-term care, the doctor's role is smaller than it would be maybe in, say, emergency. They're there, they've done what they could, they've prescribed what they think would be best, but that's basically their role. They're not usually talking directly to the patient. They're usually not giving education, mostly because the doctors don't see these people all the time. They'll come in for 1 hour once a week or something like that. Okay, here it is. This is Harinder. Both family and patient are equally important, but if either of the two refuses it matters equally. Sometimes family members' decision is important because they are going to pay for it. In Canada, we have the medical treatment is free, so the paying for it is not an issue here. It would be in the United States. It would be who was paying for this. A family member could push their ideas by paying or not paying, but we don't have that here because the healthcare treatment is free. But that, we might go someplace, another country. Michelle says, in the Philippines and Singapore, when I practice nursing, when the patient is unable to make a decision, it's the next of kin who makes the decision. Yes, that's unless, and that's the way it is in this country too, unless the patient, when they are cognitively able to say, they name a person to make the decisions. And it doesn't have to be their next of kin. I've known people who name their next door neighbor. They say, I trust this person. He's been living with me next door to me for 20 years. I haven't seen my children for 20 years. So it's the next of kin if it hasn't been decided ahead of time. And that's, again, patient-centered care. So, oh, 1 minute, sorry, 1 minute left. Okay, so in summary, it's the patient who makes the decision. It's the nurse's job to make sure they have an informed decision. It's the nurse's job to make sure that the family is also aware and also aware of the legalities of what's going on. So if anybody has more questions, they can put it on Ask a Nurse and we can continue this discussion. And I also have another scenario that we didn't get to that I'll be putting up on Ask a Nurse, and we can go through that one. It'll be a more simple scenario, but just to get practice on how to the role of a nurse. And here's the resources. We have Advanced Care Planning Workbook. It explains more about what you would go through, how somebody, if they were deciding on an advanced care plan, what they might do. Advanced Care Planning Form, which we looked at, and the Code of Ethics for Registered Nurses is very important. And what else do we have? Next slide. Okay, so on Ask a Nurse, if you have more questions about this, just put it on there, and I'll put on another scenario that we could work on too. And I'd like you to do the feedback survey.
Yeah, so in the email, everyone got the feedback survey. So
in the email, there's a link to the feedback survey, and I'd really like you to fill that out so we can make these webinars as useful to you as possible. So if you've got some suggestions, put them down there and we'll look at them and hopefully, you know, continue to improve these webinars. And the next webinar is going to be Physical Health Assessment, which is February the 24th at 1 o'clock in the afternoon. So thank you very much. And I'll talk to you on Ask a Nurse.
I'll unmute everyone's mic so they can.
Okay.
Thank you. Thank you. Have a good night.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Good night.
Good night.
Thank you. Good night.
Thank you. Bye. Have a good night.